trade and travel evolve at every turn. It's an environment founded on global ties, sustained by growing economies, and driven by strategic partnerships between nations. And it simply doesn't stop. The weight falls between government and industry to keep border management and customs operations ahead of the game. Keeping up with the momentum means combining the innovation of the private sector and leadership of governments to shape trade ecosystems that are fit to tackle today's issues and prepared for tomorrow's. The flow of goods, people, and information are moving faster than ever, and so are the technologies used to propel it. But with new innovations come new threats. Customs organizations across the world are faced with the challenge of adapting operations and technologies to keep up with the pace. Yes, you've heard it before, and you're right. It's a lot more complex than it sounds. There are processes, procedures, ever-changing rules, hurdles, and blurred lines. We get it. It's complicated. We're here to make it simple. At CT Strategies, we're curating a global trade environment that's in sync with all the intricate moving pieces between borders, one that quickly adapts new practices and innovations, a system that better foresees emerging threats and promotes economic prosperity, equity, and diversity across nations. The dots are connected. We're in the business of pulling them together. With hundreds of years of combined experience in government and a commitment to solving the unique issues facing the companies, governments, and communities we touch, we believe in harnessing the power of connection and collaboration to position our clients for success with security, transparency, and mutual prosperity as the driving force. Because together, we move forward today to get further tomorrow.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I know there's participants still rolling in, but I appreciate everybody joining us today. I'm Andrew Farrelly. I'm the CEO of CT Strategies, and I promise I will get out of the way very quickly. No one tuned in this to hear me. We have a great panel of experts to continue the conversation about something that's on everybody's mind, virtual validations. We were impressed and honored with the amount of interest that there was in this topic, and continuing to host these webinars is important to us, not just as a service to the global community, but also to make sure that the mission of the place that a lot of us came from, CBP, is continued to be done to the best of its ability. So it's a pleasure today. I will let Karen Kenny to take over in a minute, who's going to introduce briefly the panelists that we have. Pero solamente quiero decir algo en español. Yo sé que hay un montón de interés en este tema en español. Entonces, sí, obviamente este evento va a ser completamente en inglés. Pero si alguien tiene una duda o pregunta para nosotros, por favor, escríbenos en el chat y intentamos responder a todos los temas de Virtual Validations. Y también porque ha habido un montón de interés en español para este tema. Vamos a tener un evento en el año nuevo para discutir todas las cosas de evaluaciones virtuales y otras cosas de CTPAT y OEA. Entonces, no se preocupen, tenemos la habilidad para responder en español, pero este evento con los expertos que tenemos hoy va a ser completamente en inglés. Okay, so with that, Karen, I appreciate you signing up to moderate this panel of our austere experts. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Andrew. Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. Appreciate the invitation and the honor of moderating this panel today. We have three really terrific experts with us, folks with a ton of great practical advice to share with you. Before we dive into our conversation with them, we wanted to level set a little bit on where we're at as of today with respect to virtual validations. A few years ago, I think many of us would agree that no one would have thought for a second that the CTPAT validation process could be managed virtually. And now, since July of 2020, CBP has completed close to 2,000 virtual validations. As you see on the slide there, 1,880 virtual validations. That's through October of 2021. And CBP expects to be beyond that 2,000 mark by the end of the year. One of the most common questions that I hear from the trade about virtual validations when I'm chatting with folks is, how long do they take? As you can see here, CBP reports that the average length of time for a virtual validation is about 4 hours or less for 65% of companies and up to 8 hours for the rest. In speaking with my colleagues after their validations, I think there's a clear link between preparedness for the validation and the length of validation. Complexity of your supply chain obviously will certainly play a role as well. The good news, as you can see here, is that compliance has been over 90% in virtual validations through October. So folks are generally working hard and getting it right, which is great. But that 10% also is clearly a group no one wants to join. And that's really why we're here today. So let's go to the experts now and ask them to share with us what they know. I'd just like to take a moment to introduce our presenters. I've also seen quite a few comments in chat about questions and whether or not the session is being recorded, which it is. We'll have more information about that at the end of the session. And if anyone has a question, pop it into Q&A and chat. We have folks monitoring it. We're going to try to get to as many of those questions as we can. So first, I'd like to introduce you to Sean Beddoes. We're lucky to have Mr. Beddoes here with us today. He worked 6 of his 21 years at CBP in CTPAT, both in the field as a supply chain security specialist and as an acting director of the program. He's performed hundreds of validations in more than 30 countries around the world. He also served as deputy attaché in Brussels, and he helped draft much of the criteria, standards, and best practices for the World Customs Organization for its AEO program. He's also led cargo security for IATA. Today, Sean is the VP of Global Services at CT Strategies, where he and Ron together drive a number of initiatives, including AEO validation projects on behalf of some foreign governments. Also with us today is Mr. Dan Wolf, VP of Logistics at DXL Group, which is the largest omni-channel men's big and tall retailer. At DXL, Dan is responsible for all import operations, customs compliance, and domestic and international logistics. Dan has deep roots in compliance and logistics and has the most practical and instinctive understanding of the supply chain of anyone I've known in my 30 plus years in logistics. He's not known for being shy, which you'll probably catch on to here today, thankfully, because he's a generous and honest voice in our industry, something we're grateful for. He's somebody who can back of the envelope a problem and come up with a solution faster than you can turn your tablet on, I think. Dan's a licensed broker and a founding member of the Coalition of New England Companies for Trade, otherwise known as Connect. We're super lucky to have him with us, offering an importer's perspective on the virtual validation process. And last but never least is Ron May. Ron worked for CBP for more than 31 years. He's worked at 7 different ports of entry and was responsible for coordinating all US-Canada border management policies and strategies with the US ambassador and Canadian government as CBP attaché in Ottawa. Still not an Ottawa Senators fan though, I think. But moving right along, he twice served as acting director of the CTPAT program and was one of the original supply chain security specialists at the DC field office. He has also completed hundreds of validations in almost 40 countries around the world and led MRA negotiations with the customs administrations of 7 nations. He's a senior affiliate with CT Strategies and served as one of the company's subject matter experts for its recent University of Houston CTPAT study on behalf of CBP. I've had the pleasure of collaborating with both Ron and Sean during their time in government and in the private sector. Their knowledge, experience, and I think most importantly, commitment to their craft is really remarkable. So let's not waste any more time. Let's hear from them now. Again, just reminding everyone, don't be shy. We will get to as many of your questions as you can if you just type them into the Q&A section there. So I'm going to go to Ron first. Ron, maybe you can start us off by sharing some opening comments. Where are we today with respect to the CTPAT validation process?
Thanks, Karen. I was afraid when you said drive, you're going to say Sean and I drive people crazy still, but no. So I think just quickly get a couple of things across that we're going to talk about. One is all the concern about the virtual validation and the pandemic, and it's still a validation. It's still a validation process. It's still something that has its core idea of you as a participant proving what you have to the CTPAT or other AEO program. Also, I think it's very paramount that the security profile or self-assessment questionnaire, whichever program you're in, now becomes even more crucial to your participation in the program, because now that document is going to be what provides a base of information to that specialist to see what they're going to ask about. So it really becomes an even more critical document, and very important that you get evidence of implementation with that. Also, you're going to start seeing, we've heard about the new minimum security criteria. These programs have been around for quite a while now. So they're starting to strengthen their procedures and processes, which is reasonable. Supply chains are also evolving and strengthening. So we're going to see that with these programs as they start to get a little more, I'll use the expression teeth, but they have greater expectations from their participants. And I think finally, it's important that the business provider stream that is within your company now becomes even more important. Are they also strengthening their processes and procedures? And how is your connectivity and information exchange with them to help support what you're presenting to the program in the validation? So Karen, I'll save some more for later.
Thanks, Ron. Sorry, I was having a Zoom moment there, struggling with my mute button. Appreciate that introduction. That's a great kickoff. Dan, I'm going to go to you next, just for some opening comments. Can you share some thoughts with us? I know your company recently went through a domestic virtual validation, getting that notification in the midst of all of the supply chain drama where we're currently enmeshed in must have been challenging. So maybe you can give us some thoughts.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for the introduction, which I hope I can halfway live up to. But yeah, we knew it was coming, but even though it wasn't really a surprise, it was certainly a shock. And when we started to dig into what we needed to do for the validation, it became pretty evident pretty quickly that we didn't have the knowledge nor the resources to really do it properly. We had been through 10 plus years of submitting our documentation to customs, and everything was fine, and we thought we were fine, but we rapidly found out that we really didn't have the backup that we needed in our documentation to really pass the virtual validation. So we met internally and we decided, CTPAT is a really important part of our business, and we better get in some experts to help us along with the process. And we really wanted to look for somebody who was deeply involved in the virtual validation process, CTPAT, AEO, and not spread across every single trade issue that exists today. So, we stumbled upon CTPAT strategies, and we're glad we did. And we're doing well on our domestic. We've basically ready to be validated. And later this month, we'll have our foreign validation, and CT Strategies is helping with that also.
Terrific. And I have no doubt that you'll live up to that intro, Dan. Thanks for that introduction. So Sean, I know CT Strategies participated in a CTPAT webinar that not that long ago alongside the CBP CTPAT leadership. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what the common themes or takeaways were from that, and what's happening more globally with respect to trusted trader programs.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you very much, Karen. So yeah, we did have several repeated questions or common themes that came up during that previous webinar. So I just wanted to address those first and get that out of the way. So many participants asked what the new MSC requirements were that had been added, and I think the audience is probably familiar with that. There was these three broad categories: agricultural security, cybersecurity, and security vision and responsibility that were added. But to me, the thing to be more aware of, and the most important aspect of that, is that the program actually made nearly 150 changes to the minimum security criteria by strengthening the language and changing many of the shoulds into musts. So creating more requirements within the criteria. Of course, that in turn, changed the security profile questionnaire, and in turn also changes a lot of the questions being asked during the validation process. Something else that came up was regarding answering your security profile in different languages. There is a requirement to answer the security profile in English, although supporting documentation doesn't necessarily have to be in English. In fact, we see it very commonly in different companies that a lot of the supporting documents are in another language, which is fine, but you should coordinate with your supply chain security specialist to just address any issues with that in terms of their ability to verify those documents. In terms of validations virtually or in person, all indications from the CTPAT director are that first-time validations will not be done virtually, and that currently and as they see it going forward, it's going to be a tool used in revalidations only. And then in terms of regarding how the site facility works, the site facility tour works in the virtual environment, I think we'll be touching upon a lot of that today. And then just very quickly, I know we're talking about CTPAT, but a lot of CTPAT members are actually members of authorized economic operator programs around the world. And just for the awareness of the audience, the World Customs Organization last week, in fact, released their virtual validation plan. I'm not going to go into, I won't read off all of the elements in the plan, but suffice to say that the global AEO virtual validation plan very much is in line with what we're seeing in the CTPAT program in terms of things that you can expect and the methodology that they're using. So just to wrap it up, besides the U.S. through the CTPAT program, and Karen highlighted, some of those statistics, several other countries are in fact conducting virtual validations, most namely Peru, India, and Japan. So we're going to see more of this as we move into 2022. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Just one follow-on question with respect to the first-time validations.
Mm-hmm.
Any sense of whether CBP has resumed those yet, or when that might happen, or no announcements there yet?
So they have not resumed those. And then just without a pandemic, the normal kind of course of action for the CTPAT program is the first month or two, even in the new year, they typically don't get to start up with the validation cycle and traveling to conduct site visits, because they have to wait for the 2022, in this case, work plan to be released. And that typically takes 4 to 6 to 8 weeks to get released. So by no means should there be an expectation to see any in-person validations before March. And we haven't heard any messaging from the program about when they will actually start conducting in-person validations.
All right, that's super helpful. Thanks. So I'm going to head back to you, Ron. As CTPAT and NAEO members prepare to meet revalidation requirements remotely, what can they expect with the virtual revalidation process, especially with respect or within the framework of some of the new minimum security criteria?
So I think I'll go back to my initial comment. Remember, this is still a validation. So the validation process previously was a supply chain security specialist visiting your facilities, looking at the documents, taking a tour, trying to make sure that all the information that you provided is verified. That's still the case. Now we're going to do it remotely. So what you're thinking of is, how can I provide all the documentation, evidence of implementation, description of my facility in a virtual environment? So we're still looking to make sure that you are amply prepared in advance. It might take a little bit of effort to make sure that everybody's comfortable with the virtual format, making sure that all of your evidence of implementation includes those new minimum security criteria, especially cybersecurity, agriculture, and executive level as some of the bigger ones. For example, with maybe a tour of the facility, being prepared to provide some kind of video presentation. I think we'll talk about that later. But use the virtual technology, virtual platform to help complete that validation that would normally be done in person. I also think it's very important that all the documents that you would normally have when a supply chain security specialist visits are somehow queued up and available for that virtual validation. Example, your IT policy. That's something that's absolutely going to be important. Have that available, have that ready, and have the SME who is attached to that division ready to explain those things. That'll help move through in a more rapid manner and kind of show the strength of what you have on hand. Evidence implementation, again, I mentioned in the beginning about the security profile and how important it is. Now more than ever, that needs not just to be attached or we have that. You need to have not only information on what the written policies and procedures are, but now attach things, pictures, diagrams, charts, photographs to help support it, because now that I'm going to say inspector because I'm old, but the supply chain security specialist isn't going to be at the facility to see it in person. So how are you going to convey that? That's why the security profile really needs to have that extra strong level of evidence of implementation. And then make sure this is your opportunity to prove executive level support for your commitment to CTPAT. Have a member of the executive level available in some form to maybe just step in for a minute, say hello, say how important CTPAT is. Even more, and we can talk about this in more depth, having them participate with a statement on video or giving a welcome, just to show that your company is strongly committed. Use the virtual process to be, in many ways, it might be more efficient because you're not going to have to take time to walk somewhere and take time to find somebody. You should have that all available. So I think in many ways, if we look at this not as a big hill to climb, something that may actually enhance the process, I think it'll be more successful.
Terrific. Thanks, Ron. Great tips there on ways to involve the executives in the virtual validation process. I know some folks have been really creative there.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to go back to Sean now. And Sean, maybe you can share with us your advice to folks who are preparing for virtual validation.
Sure. So I would say pay attention to your P's, not your P's and Q's, but just the P's, preparation and practice. So remember that the virtual setting is creating a more focused and concise version of the validation, if you will. And so therefore your preparation must be, even more intense and detail oriented. In a physical on-site validation, there's a lot more flexibility because there's more time. Typically, the entire day is allotted to do this. If there's documentation that needs to be retrieved, somebody can go grab it. If there's a subject matter expert or a particular representative that needs to be grabbed that wasn't, planned, that didn't plan to be in the meeting, they can grab them. If there's a particular part of the facility that needs to be checked again to see something, to answer a question, all that can be done. There's all this flexibility. Of course, in the virtual environment, it's not like that. And in fact, we've already heard from the CTPAT statistics that Karen shared that, the virtual validations are the majority of them are taking less than 4 hours. And really, that is more like between 2 to 4 hours. So in some cases, they're only taking 2.5 hours. So there's just not a lot of extra time built into that process. So, your preparation should certainly include gathering the correct people for your team and make sure that you have the correct documents to support the statements in your security profile. The agenda provided by your supply chain security specialist is going to help you focus your efforts. Organize your evidence of implementation and supporting documents in alignment with that agenda, and then rehearse with your team so that everybody knows the flow of show and their roles, etc. Make sure that you designate one member of the team to be the lead, and they are the one responsible for taking point with the interaction between the other team members and the supply chain security specialist. Make sure that you practice your screen sharing capabilities in advance, especially if you plan on playing videos, as Ron mentioned, because they take more bandwidth. Obviously, if there's language issues, which does occur, particularly with in the importer community and the foreign site virtual validations. And finally, don't wait for the validation itself, the day of the validation, to inform your supply chain security specialist of any restricted areas or documents that you're not going to be able to discuss or share. Do that in advance so there's no surprises. So it's really just preparation and practice. That's the key to success.
Thanks, Sean. Just a follow-on question for you. We've had a bunch of questions from folks about kind of the basics, the practical aspect. What should folks expect in terms of timing? So when you're notified that you're going to be up for a virtual validation to when the actual validation occurs, both the domestic and the foreign validation, reval.
Right. Well, certainly anybody that was selected for virtual validations in 2021 would have been notified already. So if anybody in the audience is concerned that they're going to be notified next week that they have to go through a virtual validation, that's not going to be the case. The correspondence will be via email. It'll be a generic letter that indicates you've been selected for virtual validation, and that you'll be contacted by a supply chain security specialist with more details on the agenda. The notification letter starts the clock, and I think by policy and rule, they can contact you and schedule a virtual validation within 30 days of that letter. But the reality is the program is a partnership. Dan can attest to this. I think in his case, it was sort of a rapid kind of fire where they received the notification and then shortly thereafter received communication from the specialist that they wanted to schedule the validation. And it was just a matter of discussing it with the supply chain security specialist to find a time that worked out for everybody. So it's not something that really changes in the virtual environment in terms of the notification and the timing.
Yeah, Sean, like you said, it's really important to communicate with the SCCS right from the beginning. And if you don't believe that you can supply what was needed in 30 days, like we believe that, we said, look, we need some extra time, and it wasn't an issue at all. And we were able to be very well prepared at the time of the virtual validation.
Thanks, Dan and Sean, appreciate it. So I'm gonna go back to you again, Ron. And you folks have a ton of practical experience, right? In how these processes work and how to manage them virtually. So maybe you can share with us some best practices around steps that successful CTPAT program members have taken to prepare for their validations.
Sure. So some of the virtual validations that I have done recently, one of the things I think that's very, very helpful and really adds to the value of the validation is a virtual tour of the facility. And it can be very simple. It doesn't have to be a big video production. It can be something on a cell phone. But remember, in the old style validation with the personal visit, that was the whole point, is to go to the facility, walk around, open doors, go to the entrance gates, see where the loading docks are. Now we don't have that ability because the SCSS can't go in person. So doing it virtually is a great idea. Just a simple, this is our facility, this is the fencing, this is where the trucks enter and exit, this is our restricted loading, unloading area, this is where visitor parking is. Something simple like that really is an excellent way to give an initial image of what your facility is. The other thing I think is a really good use of video technology is to just take an individual, an employee, have them take their badge and show how they enter the building. Where do they swipe their card? Who do they talk to? Do they use a biometric device? How do they access into the facility? And then while they're in the facility, maybe showing some of the places they can go and some of the places they can't go and why that is. So for example, being able to go and say, okay, I can't access the IT room when I swipe my card because I'm not authorized to be in there. That's a great video example of one of the limitations of the access controls. Or on the same token, being able to say, well, because I'm a supervisor, I have access to this facility. Also showing some of the things, many employees will wear different kinds of work clothing to identify their different place they operate. Putting all that on the video is a great way to show physical evidence that process is in place. Also, Sean already kind of said it, but you can't say it enough. You've got to have advanced preparation with your team more than ever because of the virtual environment. And that just doesn't mean saying, hey, when I ask about IT, you're going to jump in, or when I ask about security, you're going to jump in. Go and have an advanced meeting and kind of do a mock validation. Go through it all together and talk about how are you going to present it? What are you going to do? What are you going to talk about? Make sure the people who participate in the validation understand what it is they're participating in. It sounds ridiculous, but a number of times when I've done validations in the past, they'd run down and grab somebody from HR and say, come upstairs and talk to these guys. And they're like, okay, who are you? What do you want? Make sure there's some advanced preparation. There's some knowledge of what they're doing and why they're doing it. Also, another great idea when they're looking for information on processes and procedures, actual examples. So for example, let's say you have a 7-point inspection sheet that's taken by someone, they inspect the truck, it's signed by them, maybe the driver and the supervisor. Show actual ones that have been used, historical evidence. That's a great way to show that the process is in place. Also, when you have cargo control procedures and processes with customers, if there's a customer file, get a file or two and show, okay, here's the invoice, here's the bill of lading, here's the purchase order, here's the seal description, maybe there's a seal anomaly, here's the email traffic between us to figure out what happened and why, here's the receipt when it entered our facility. Those actual files show that the evidence of implementation is in place. when I say we, I still think I'm in CBP. When we did it all those years back, we would ask for that. Show us the visitor log. Don't show me today. Show me 6 months ago. Show me a year ago. Show me a folder that has the processes and procedures you've just explained to me. So having that available is always really, really helpful. We've also found that in these virtual validations, when you do some of these things, they go quicker. They're a lot smoother, a lot faster. Everybody has what they want. We don't have to wait and go find somebody in an office. We don't have to wait for a manual to be brought up. It's all right there. And if you have that advanced prep and you lay it out and people know what they're doing and you're ready with the flow of show, it's going to be not only successful, but probably a lot less painful than it would have been without that preparation. Thanks.
Reducing anxiety level.
Yeah, it's true.
Well, I don't know if it reduces the anxiety level at all, but you know, everything that Ron kind of brought up is really helpful, and it was part and parcel of what we tried to do for our virtual validation. And you know, the video we made, we just had, as Ron said, somebody. I was with our security head of security, and he walked through the building, and somebody on a cell phone was just doing the video for us, and we got into the building with the cards. We showed the cameras and how they could be zoomed in and out and what they were on. And so that really helped a lot. We showed the guard shack. We showed the how access in and out of the container yard worked. So it was maybe 5 minutes, but it was really helped clarify about what we did and who we are.
That's great. And Dan and Ron, there have been a couple of questions in chat about the video. And just to be clear, this is a pre-recorded video, right? This is not a live feed. This is something you record and you show during the validation.
Very much advisable to take your time, do it in advance, and maybe even do a couple takes. For example, one of the folks we were working with the first time, they didn't really show their CCTV cameras. They didn't show the fencing enough, so they kind of went back over it. Look at it, see how descriptive it is, but take your time with it. Doing live video is probably, that goes back to, you know, you're going to have to pick up the camera or the phone and walk around, and you know Murphy's Law, something's not going to be where it's not supposed to be. So, but yes, advanced preparation, and then, you know, use this. My suggestion would be keep that in the library and then update it on a regular basis, especially as processes and procedures change or the facility changes. But keep that baseline video evidence and then just add to it. That's a best practice. You're ever evolving your evidence of implementation.
Great.
Yeah, I think the other important part about not doing it live is it's a lot easier for you to control what's on the video and what's not on the video.
Right.
Good point.
No doubt. So getting back to Sean, so we're talking about technology here a little bit already, right, Sean? But maybe you can add to that. So to the point we just covered, we've all had our share of Zoom catastrophes, right? And frozen screens and everything else. Maybe you could just give some tips on employing technology successfully during the virtual validation.
Absolutely, yeah. It's certainly it's good and evil at the same time. The technology. You know, the first thing that I'd like to stress is you know, be prepared for the tech issue when it's going to happen, not if, when. Because no matter how many times you practice and test the system, inevitably something always happens. It's amazing, and you know. The more you're prepared for this, then when it happens, then you know your team can pivot quickly and avoid causing any major delays or awkward moments during the validation. You can you know, you can mitigate this risk as much as possible by testing your equipment and having a backup plan. For example, if Ron loses his connection right now, then we've already made a plan that I will take over and I'll start talking. And, you know, in fact, yesterday, just being totally honest, you know, we tested the system yesterday. We made sure we could all connect and everything. Ron's Wi-Fi was having all kinds of issues. And so we said, all right, well, if this happens tomorrow, what's our plan? On top of that, the power in my house went out for no reason at all. It was a beautiful sunny day. The power went out. I lost my connection. I dropped off the call. So I had to quickly dial back in by phone. I would say all those things were great things to happen because it gave us the opportunity to prepare. So, you know, God forbid my power goes out again. These guys will jump in, fill in the gap, and I'll dial back in on my phone because I was, you know, prepared for it from yesterday. So just being prepared and having a backup plan and then a backup plan for your backup plan, I think it's really important. Of course, coordinating all this is equally as important. So, you know, I highly recommend that you create like a group chat with all of the team members that are going to be part of the call. And that way, if there's an issue, then people can react and respond in real time. So that's definitely something that you should do. And then something else, just from a, you know, more of a, you know, general comment about technology is with the virtual validations, we recommend that members of the team call in from their own computers and workspaces, as this will cut down on background noise and potential chatter among the team members. So yeah, just being prepared for the inevitable hiccup with the system, and just going back to the conversation on the video, pre-recorded video versus streaming. You know, while there's probably a great benefit to streaming a video and being able to, you know, potentially walk around 2 areas as requested by the supply chain security specialist, the reality is the risk of doing that and having IT issues and connectivity issues is so high that it just doesn't make a lot of sense. You're much better off, as Ron said, to pre-record something and just cover all the key areas of the facility.
Yeah, and also what you're saying, Sean, it's really important. We talked about having a captain or a leader, have a co-captain, a co-leader, because if that person is the one that loses the information, somebody else needs to step in and pilot the ship. So have a couple people who are ready to jump in and be able to take over.
Yeah.
Great advice. I actually saw a pretty interesting question in Q&A that I never thought about before. I don't know the answer to, but does CBP record the virtual validations?
I don't believe they did.
Yeah.
We'll check on that, but as far as I know right now, no, there isn't any methodology, I think, for them to record them. But that's an interesting question because, you know, maybe someday that could replace the validation report, a record of the actual validation. You never know, but
yeah, I have not seen that done. I'm not going to say it isn't being done at some point by somebody, but I have not seen that done, and I'm not aware of that being an aspect of what CTPAT's doing in the virtual validations.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so the practical application of all of this is where the rubber hits the road, and right, we either get 2 thumbs up or not. So let's go to Dan Wolf now, who's lived or is living right through virtual validations. Can you give us some advice, Dan, on best practices that have worked for you, both on the domestic side and with your foreign revalidation prep?
Well, you know, first of all, I had gray hair before this thing started. It's maybe white now, I don't know, but a lot of really what Ron and Sean have said is really what goes into it. You know, from our point of view, our CEO was more than happy to do an intro and tell about the importance of CTPAT in our organization, which it is, and how we filter it down to all of our associates. And having that executive backing, it helps you in a lot of ways, and that it helps you create a team to put this together. You just can't put it together by yourself. We don't know enough. You know, the 2021 MSCs are just so broad that there's no way for at least me to know about it. So we were able to put together a group of SMEs or subject matter experts from HR, from security, from compliance, to help get things going and answer questions that were really what Sean refers to as the agenda. And the agenda are specific questions that are asked by the SCCS that they have concerns about. I mean, one of the things you really find is if you lead this, you learn a lot about your organization. that you didn't know before. One of the things that we found out, and let's go with money laundering, which is a particular concern right now with customs. Well, we didn't have a money laundering procedure per se, but we had various things that we were doing that ensured that there wasn't an issue with money laundering. And it started with our audits of our vendors, the social and CTPAT audits that we keep on file and that we do every year. The fact that our finance department will only pay against existing POs and won't pay for more than is on there unless there's authorization from, let's say, logistics, or if there's a transportation charge added to that. Logistics had to approve that. So that's what helped create the comfort that, we were watching over our vendors. One of the other things that you can do, and I think Ron brought it up, is if you could find out from your SCCS who your foreign validation vendor is going to be, you can shape part of your domestic validation against that. So we knew that we had a factory coming up in Vietnam that was going to be virtually validated. So we made sure that we had a set of documents in there that we had submitted that went from the purchase order all the way through to the receipt of the goods. And the SCCS could follow the container number, the bill of lading number, the seal number, all the way through until the receipt. They could also see, as Ron said, the excuse me, the 7-point container inspection, that it was signed. And in fact, we have an extra statement on ours regarding the fact that it's also been checked for agriculture and pests. So that was a good way for us to go, and we're keeping our fingers crossed for maybe even more than that or less than that, that the validation will go well with our foreign vendor. The SCCS may not have had time to thoroughly go into your security profile because they're really quite large now. The amount of documentation that's required is significant. So the agenda is where they're going to ask the questions that they have concerns about, and that's where you really need to go into detail and ensure that all your processes have, as Ron said, excuse me, evidence of implementation. And again, review what your SMEs are going to be saying, what they're responsible for before the call, have a mock validation, make it very clear to them that they have to be on the call the whole time. They may be able to look and do other things and listen, through one ear, but they do have to be available because one thing can lead to another that can lead to another. And the final thing that Sean and Ron really said is that, a picture or a video is worth 1,000 words. So as I said, we had 2 videos, one intro from our CEO about the importance of CTPAT to our organization. And the other one was maybe a 5 or 6 minute video about the security part of the building that I did with our director of security. So that's my advice, at least, for what it's worth.
It's good advice, Dan.
Really helpful, Dan. Thank you. A couple of follow-up questions. So just to be clear, the domestic and foreign validations don't happen at the same time, right? They're coordinated separately.
Mhm.
Well, theoretically, they're not supposed to do a foreign validation until the domestic is passed.
Okay. So
And also part of the domestic validation is the partnership validation team is supposed to have kind of a discussion on where the foreign component should take place. There should be input from the partner as much as from the SCSS to kind of discuss. We've had this discussion before. Some places have had issues that the company's aware of that might make them the point. You don't always just go to the place that's the farthest away. You might go to a place where there's been some thefts or supply chain anomalies. So that decision should be made by the partnership validation team.
Terrific. That's helpful. And those virtual foreign virtual validations are happening in China in some cases.
Currently they're not CTPAT is not conducting virtual validations in China.
Okay. But they are in India, Vietnam?
Yeah,
as two
ours
examples?
is in Vietnam,
Okay,
and our previous one had been in India.
okay. Okay, great. That's helpful. So another question that was out there, Dan, is let's say somebody outsources their distribution. Would it be wise for them to have a rep from that warehouse from the DC present during the virtual validation?
Yeah, I would say absolutely, and you know, you'll have to make sure that that warehouse that your distribution center that you're using also meets the MSC requirements for that particular part of the business. And you know, what happens if there's a theft? What happens if something's missing? What happens if a seal is incorrect or a seal is broken? So they'll need to be responsible for all that, answering that, but ultimately you're the responsible party because you've hired them.
Makes sense. Okay, thanks. So there's a ton of questions here. We'll come back to some of these though. Let's just go, I guess, finally to both Sean and Ron. And maybe you could each just give us some quick final thoughts on pitfalls, areas where you see folks experiencing issues during revalidation. Sean, do you want to jump in first?
Sure, yeah. So for me, probably the biggest pitfall I see is not speaking to the evidence of implementation. So what I mean by that is, you know, the supply chain security specialist is going to ask to see, for example, your cybersecurity policy as part of the questioning. When your IT department representative is explaining your cybersecurity policy, they should be pointing out specific and relevant sections of that policy while it's being shared on the screen and saying, for example, as you can see in Section 8 of our policy, we monitor the system for improper access attempts, and when they occur, we follow steps 1 through 6 to address the issue. So, you know, when you speak to the documented evidence of implementation, it really closes the loop for the supply chain security specialist, and it's just a comprehensive way of answering the question. The other pitfall that I see, and Ron will probably pick up on this, and maybe this is something he's going to say too, is when companies answer a question, say, well, no, we don't do that. We just don't do that. Typically, that's not actually the case, and usually that's a sign of the representative or the company not being prepared for the validation. You know, an example would be, do you conduct background checks for prospective employees? No, actually, we don't. Yeah, we don't do that. But when you dig a little deeper, you find out they actually have a very comprehensive policy within their human resources department, and they do all kinds of checks, you know, whether that is, you know, contacting previous employers or challenging any gaps in employment history, making people attest to the information that they provided as being accurate, truthful, verifying, you know, government IDs or official IDs, that kind of stuff. So at the end of the day, they're actually satisfying the criteria. So it's not a question of we don't do this. It's presenting the answer in, well, this is how we satisfy that criteria. So so really what they meant to say is, yeah, we do all kinds of things, but we don't do a criminal background check, which, by the way, is not a must in the program, a criminal background check.
Yeah, and for me, I'm going to go to a real simple one. The thing that is most frustrating is confusion. So when you're doing your virtual validation and you ask a question, and then there's 90 seconds of silence because nobody knows who to answer, you're sitting there kind of staring at each other. That's where we've already talked about before. The captain or leader has to says, hey, Tom, hey, Karen, can you answer that question and get us back on track? Because that becomes very uncomfortable. And sometimes you run into that, especially in a foreign situation with a language issue. So it's also very helpful to have someone on the other point who maybe can help give English translations so that you keep that pace up. I know it sounds kind of petty, but we've all been on the phone or watching something, and then there's a pause, and it's kind of like, what's going on? Why? And it throws people off. It throws everybody off. So preventing that confusion, having that pace set up, having the ability for somebody to say, hey, can you take that? We've said prep, I don't know how many times, but again, I want to emphasize, when you prep people for this, don't just tell them that you're going to participate in a CTPAT validation and you're going to talk about this. Make sure they know why they're talking about it, what they're doing to help the company participate in the program. I've always said the most important and most successful way you can complete a validation is to not just create a security profile so you pass CTPAT validations. You're creating a security profile that really kind of documents and helps evolve through the core of the company. Because if it's a core process and something everyone does all the time, not just only for a validation, you're going to be more successful. And I think then you're going to have commitment from these individuals to say, even when it's a month or two, not during the validation, say, hey, by the way, you need to update the security profile because we just switched our IT platform to this. So those are some of the things, again, not being prepared, not having the ability to kind of answer things, and absolutely having all that information available.
Thanks, Ron. So we're running really tight on time, and there's a million questions out there. Before I turn things back over to Andrew, I'm just going to ask one quick question. Will CBP conduct a revalidation in Spanish?
So the official answer is no. The validations take place in English. The unofficial answer is there are a large percentage of supply chain security specialists that are bilingual, multilingual, and particularly the Houston field office handles and manages a lot of the companies that are in Mexico, for example. So they're well equipped for this, and they do often conduct the validations in Spanish, but officially that's not the case. So you do have to just work that out with your supply chain security specialist.
All right, great. Thanks, Sean. So again, we're just at about time here. I want to thank all of you for your contribution. I think this was a really fantastic session. We had one attendee ask if this was being recorded because they want to show it to the executives in their company, which I think is a fabulous idea. It is being recorded. We'll be back to you with more information there. There's an extraordinary team that works alongside Ron and Sean and Andrew that I know are collecting all of your questions, and I'm sure they'll make sure that you get answers to your questions if we didn't cover it during this session. And with that, I would like to turn it back over to Andrew Farrelly for some closing remarks.
Thanks, Karen. And I got the easiest job on the planet. I jump in on the morning and or at the beginning, and I jump in at the end. So appreciate doing the moderating job, Karen. That's never easy. So thank you very much. Thank you to Sean and Ron and Dan. The expertise that you all bring. I think you can see it through the chat and through the questions and answers, and is invaluable. Before everybody starts dropping off as they heard my voice, I just want to further answer to one thing, but I'll do it in both English and Spanish. To your point, Karen, we will be sending around an email with a link to the recording so that everybody can access this event afterwards. We're also going to be sending out, which could answer a lot of the questions that we weren't able to address head on. We have a frequently asked questions document that we've put together over our time doing these validations in both English and Spanish. So we'll send that out as well. And we'll also be sending out the slides. Entonces, ya dije que en el fin vamos a mandarles todo la grabación de este evento, también las láminas, y también tenemos preguntas frecuentes que podemos compartirles, y tal vez va a responder a cada pregunta, pero obviamente si alguien necesita algo, estamos disponibles para responder a cualquier pregunta ustedes tienen. So with that, I just want to thank everybody for participating. This topic just maintains its popularity, and both from anxiety and how to do it. And I think, one thing that was kind of touched on is the concept of doing things virtually may have been created in a pandemic, but that's not necessarily to say that when this, God willing, is behind us, it will not be some part of a fixture of the program going forward. So we really want to take this time, these years, to really understand it. So in that vein, we will be having more events, so be on the lookout for that. Vamos a tener más eventos, especialmente en el año nuevo vamos a tener un evento en español. La popularidad de este tema en México y otros países es muy importante para nosotros. And with that, I'll stop now and tell everybody happy holidays. I hope everyone has a safe and happy time during the holidays, and a great New Year. Muchísimas felicidades para las fiestas y un próspero año a todos. And so thanks, everybody. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.